Stop hovering over me like some desperate puppy. I heard those words echo across the marble floors of Portland's most exclusive charity auction, spoken by my wife Amber in front of the city's wealthiest donors. We'd been married for 4 years, and I thought I knew what embarrassment felt like until that moment. I'm Tyler, a plumbing contractor who'd built a solid business serving this same affluent community, and I just approached Amber during the silent auction to suggest we bid together on a weekend spa package. I thought it would be nice to do something romantic together, maybe reconnect after months of growing distance between us. Instead, she turned my simple suggestion into a public spectacle that would change everything. Amber worked as a junior marketing associate at a boutique advertising agency downtown, always concerned about appearances and networking opportunities. She'd spent the entire evening working the room, introducing herself to potential clients while treating me like an unwelcome accessory she'd rather leave in the coat check. I'd watched her transform from the woman I married into someone who seemed embarrassed by my presence, particularly around her professional contacts. The charity auction was supposed to be our night out together, a chance to support the Children's Hospital while enjoying Portland's social scene. I'd even bought a new suit, wanting to look appropriate for the event she described as important for her career advancement. When I saw her studying the spa package auction item, I genuinely thought she might enjoy it, so I walked over with my bidding paddle to suggest we go in together. Her response wasn't just rejection, it was calculated cruelty delivered at maximum volume for maximum impact. The wealthy donors around us stopped their conversations to stare, and I felt every eye in that ballroom focused on the desperate puppy who'd apparently overstepped his bounds. What Amber didn't realize was that her boss Philip had been standing directly behind us, close enough to witness her entire outburst. I saw his expression shift from surprise to concern as he processed what he'd just heard one of his employees say to her husband. Philip's wife, a major donor to the hospital, looked genuinely shocked by Amber's behavior, and I watched several other couples exchange uncomfortable glances. The moment Amber noticed Philip's presence, her face went pale as she realized she'd just damaged her professional reputation in the worst possible way. I didn't say anything else to her that night. Instead, I found Amber's younger sister Brooke near the bar and told her this public humiliation was my final wake-up call. Brooke had always been kind to me, and she deserved to know that I'd been planning my exit strategy for months after discovering Amber had been telling her coworkers I was holding her back from bigger career opportunities. I'd heard about those conversations through mutual friends who thought I should know what she was saying behind my back. Brooke looked genuinely sad but not surprised when I explained that tonight's performance was just the public version of how Amber had been treating me privately for over a year. The drive home was silent, with Amber staring out the passenger window while I processed the fact that my marriage was effectively over. She'd made her feelings about me crystal clear in front of people whose opinions mattered to her professionally, and there was no coming back from that level of public disrespect. I spent that drive thinking about the specialized plumbing certification program in Seattle I'd been considering, the one Amber had mocked me for even researching. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I'd made my decision about more than just continuing education. I didn't confront Amber that night, choosing instead to execute the meticulously planned escape I'd been preparing for months while she slept off too much champagne from the charity auction. I'd learned long ago that Amber was at her most dangerous when cornered, and I wanted a clean exit without the drama she specialized in creating. Instead of the emotional confrontation she would have expected, I implemented a strategic disappearance that would leave her scrambling to understand what had happened. I started by systematically documenting everything with photos and videos, knowing Amber's tendency to rewrite history when it suited her narrative. I photographed our financial records, documented the current state of our shared accounts, and even recorded video evidence of her personal belongings to prevent any future claims about missing items. What she didn't know was that I'd been quietly recording our conversations for weeks using an app on my phone, capturing her dismissive comments and cruel observations about our marriage. I had months of audio evidence showing her pattern of belittling me, calling my work beneath her standards, and discussing her plans to find someone more suitable for her career ambitions. These recordings would prove invaluable if she tried to spin the narrative later or contest anything in divorce proceedings. I methodically transferred funds from our joint accounts into a separate account I'd opened months earlier, leaving exactly half of our shared savings while ensuring she couldn't access my business earnings or personal assets. I canceled our shared streaming services, gym memberships, and subscription boxes, but I also made sure to document every financial change with screenshots and receipts. The corporate apartment I'd secretly rented 2 weeks earlier was already furnished and ready, located in a different neighborhood where Amber was unlikely to find me accidentally. I'd been paying for it out of my business account while maintaining the appearance of our normal life together. My lawyer had been expecting this night for months, and I'd already provided him with copies of security footage from our home security system showing Amber's pattern of dismissive treatment toward me during everyday interactions. The cameras had captured her eye rolls, dismissive gestures, and moments when she'd openly mocked me to friends who visited our house. I loaded my truck with carefully selected belongings, focusing on practical items and sentimental pieces that actually mattered to me, leaving behind the expensive furniture and decorations that Amber had chosen to impress her colleagues. I took my tools, my grandfather's woodworking equipment, and the few personal items that had meaning beyond their monetary value. The note I left was brief but comprehensive, explaining that I'd been accepted to the specialized plumbing certification program in Seattle, the opportunity she'd mocked me for considering just 2 weeks earlier. I detailed how her public humiliation at the charity auction had simply been the final confirmation of what I'd already known about her feelings toward me and our marriage. I informed her that our joint accounts would be frozen pending legal proceedings, that I'd retained legal counsel, and that all future communication should go through my attorney. I also mentioned that I'd documented our conversations and interactions extensively, suggesting she speak with her own lawyer before making any public statements about our separation. What I didn't tell her in the note was that I'd already been offered a supervisor position in Seattle and had accepted it the day after the charity auction, pending completion of the certification program. My new employer was impressed by my experience and business acumen, offering not just career advancement but the chance to train other contractors in advanced techniques. I'd been planning this transition for months, building relationships with suppliers and contractors in the Pacific Northwest while Amber remained focused on her Portland social climbing. By dawn, I was driving north toward Seattle with everything that mattered to me packed in my truck, leaving behind a meticulously documented trail that would make the divorce proceedings swift and uncontestable. I felt lighter with every mile I put between myself and the woman who'd spent 4 years making me feel like I wasn't good enough for her ambitions. The morning news was playing on the radio, and I found myself actually listening to it instead of mentally preparing for another day of walking on eggshells around Amber's moods and professional frustrations. Amber woke to discover my methodical disappearance and immediately panicked when she realized our joint accounts were frozen pending legal proceedings, leaving her unable to access the funds she'd grown accustomed to using freely. I heard about her frantic morning through our mutual friend Derek, who received multiple hysterical phone calls from her demanding to know if he'd heard from me or knew where I'd gone. She'd apparently spent an hour searching our house for clues about my whereabouts before discovering the note I'd left explaining my departure and legal preparations. What she hadn't expected was learning from her hastily retained lawyer that I'd been recording our conversations for weeks, and these recordings could be used in divorce proceedings if she contested anything or tried to spread false narratives about our marriage. Her attorney advised her to be extremely careful about any public statements regarding our separation, since I had documented evidence of her behavior patterns and treatment of me. Amber's attempts to reach me through mutual contacts backfired spectacularly when people revealed they'd witnessed her pattern of belittling me at social gatherings over the past year. Derek told me that Sarah from her book club had actually mentioned feeling uncomfortable watching Amber criticize my work and appearance in front of other couples during dinner parties. Even her own sister Brooke admitted to Derek that she'd been concerned about how Amber spoke to me, particularly when she thought others weren't paying attention. The financial reality hit Amber hardest when she tried to maintain our lifestyle on her marketing associate salary alone. She discovered from our landlord that I had been the primary leaseholder and had arranged a clean exit from our rental agreement, leaving her scrambling to qualify for the apartment alone on her income. Our landlord, Mrs. Patterson, had always liked me because I'd handled maintenance issues myself and never caused problems, and she was surprisingly frank with Amber about needing to find a co-signer or consider a smaller place. Amber calculated that her salary covered barely 60% of their previous lifestyle expenses, including the luxury car lease, the upscale apartment, and the social activities she considered essential for her career networking. She'd never paid attention to our household budget, assuming I handled everything while she focused on her professional advancement and social connections. The credit cards she'd been using freely were linked to accounts I'd closed or transferred, leaving her with only her personal card with its modest limit. Derek mentioned that Amber had called him crying about discovering that I'd been paying for most of her lifestyle expenses, something she'd never fully comprehended until the money stopped flowing. She'd assumed we were equally contributing to our standard of living, not realizing that my plumbing business generated significantly more income than her entry-level marketing position. Her attempts to locate me through my work contacts revealed that I'd been offered a supervisor position in Seattle and had accepted it the day after the charity auction, making it clear that my departure wasn't impulsive but carefully planned. My former business partner, Tom, told her I'd been preparing for this transition for months, building relationships with contractors and suppliers in the Pacific Northwest while maintaining my Portland client base. Tom also mentioned that several clients had specifically requested my contact information because they valued my work and reliability, something that seemed to surprise Amber, who'd always dismissed my profession as beneath her career ambitions. The most damaging revelation came when former friends and colleagues began distancing themselves from Amber as word spread about both the public scene at the charity auction and my recordings of our private conversations. Her boss Philip had apparently shared details about the auction incident with other agency partners, raising questions about her judgment and emotional control in professional situations. Amber discovered that I'd been documenting her treatment of me as evidence for months, something she never suspected during our relationship because she'd grown so comfortable with her pattern of dismissive behavior toward me. Amber's humiliation at the charity auction had professional repercussions when her boss Philip questioned her judgment and emotional control in client-facing situations, particularly after witnessing her public outburst toward me. I learned from Derek that Philip had called Amber into his office 3 days after the auction to discuss what he'd witnessed and express concerns about her professionalism. Several major donors who had witnessed the scene specifically requested that she not be assigned to their accounts, forcing the agency to demote her to internal projects only and effectively ending her client interaction responsibilities. The Whitmore Foundation, one of the agency's largest clients, had been particularly disturbed by her behavior and made it clear they wouldn't work with someone who demonstrated such poor emotional regulation in public settings. Philip explained to Amber that her outburst had reflected poorly on the entire agency, especially since they depended on maintaining positive relationships with Portland's philanthropic community. Her attempts to locate me through my work contacts revealed that I'd been offered a supervisor position in Seattle and had accepted it the day after the charity auction, making my departure seem even more calculated and final. Tom, my former business partner, told her that I'd been discussing the Seattle opportunity for weeks and had already begun transitioning my Portland clients to other contractors. What surprised Amber most was learning that several of my longtime clients had specifically requested my contact information because they valued my work and wanted to maintain the relationship even after my move. Tom mentioned that the Henderson family, whose bathroom renovation I'd completed last year, had already scheduled me for work at their vacation home in Bellingham. Former friends and colleagues began distancing themselves from Amber as word spread about both the public scene and my recordings of our private conversations, creating a social isolation she hadn't anticipated. Her book club friend Sarah admitted to Derek that she'd felt uncomfortable during several dinner parties where Amber had criticized my appearance and profession in front of other couples. Even worse for Amber's social standing, several couples who'd witnessed her charity auction outburst were sharing the story within Portland's tight-knit professional community. Her coworker Michelle confided that people were questioning how someone could treat their spouse so cruelly in public, wondering what their private interactions must be like. The recordings I'd made became particularly damaging when Amber's lawyer advised her that my documentation showed a clear pattern of emotional abuse and public humiliation that would make any contested divorce proceedings very difficult for her. Her attorney explained that I had months of evidence demonstrating her dismissive treatment, professional embarrassment tactics, and repeated statements about being held back by our marriage. Derek told me that Amber had broken down crying in her lawyer's office when she heard specific quotes from our recorded conversations played back to her. She apparently hadn't realized how cruel and calculating her words sounded when removed from her justifications and emotional context. The professional consequences extended beyond her immediate job when word spread through Portland's advertising and marketing community about her demotion and the reasons behind it. Amber discovered that Philip had mentioned her situation to colleagues at other agencies during industry networking events, effectively blacklisting her from similar positions throughout the city. Her dreams of advancing to account executive or starting her own boutique agency were effectively destroyed by her reputation for poor judgment and emotional instability. The financial pressure intensified when Amber realized she couldn't qualify for our apartment lease renewal on her reduced income and damaged professional standing. Mrs. Patterson, our landlord, had always appreciated my reliability and maintenance skills, and she made it clear that Amber would need a substantial security deposit and cosigner to remain in the unit alone. Amber's parents, who lived on a fixed retirement income, couldn't provide the financial guarantee she needed, forcing her to consider much smaller and less prestigious housing options. She discovered that Tyler had been documenting her behavior as evidence, something she never suspected during their relationship because she'd grown so comfortable with her pattern of dismissive treatment toward him, never considering that her actions might have legal consequences. Amber traveled to Seattle uninvited 3 months after my departure, tracking down my new workplace through social media connections, only to find me thriving in my expanded role and living with Kelly, a nurse practitioner I'd met through my certification program. Derek later told me about Amber's desperate road trip, which she'd apparently planned after discovering my LinkedIn profile showed significant professional advancement and genuine happiness in my new life. She'd convinced herself that I was struggling without her and would welcome reconciliation once she showed up to offer forgiveness for the charity auction incident. What she found instead was a completely transformed version of me, confident and successful in ways she'd never seen during our marriage. Kelly already knew everything about Amber because I'd been completely transparent about my divorce and the circumstances that led to my departure from Portland. When Amber appeared at the coffee shop near my workplace, Kelly greeted her with professional politeness but firm boundaries, making it clear that she understood exactly who Amber was and why I'd left. Kelly's presence wasn't defensive or territorial, but rather the calm confidence of someone who knew she was valued and respected in our relationship. My response to Amber's unexpected appearance was controlled indifference rather than the emotional reaction she'd expected, which seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. I genuinely moved on rather than playing hard to get or trying to make her jealous, and that reality hit her harder than any vindictive behavior could have. The confrontation took place at a quiet corner table where I calmly explained that her pattern of public disrespect had made reconciliation impossible, regardless of any apologies or promises to change. I told her that the charity auction incident wasn't an isolated mistake but the culmination of years of dismissive treatment that I'd finally stopped accepting. Kelly's presence during this conversation made it clear that I'd found someone who valued my work, respected my goals, and treated me as an equal partner rather than a financial convenience. Amber tried various approaches during our brief meeting, from tearful apologies to accusations that I'd abandoned our marriage without giving her a chance to fix things. She claimed that losing her job responsibilities and social connections had taught her to appreciate what we'd had together, but I could see she was more upset about the consequences than genuinely sorry for her behavior. When she mentioned the recordings I'd made, insisting they didn't represent the real dynamics of our relationship, I simply pointed out that they captured her exact words and tone during unguarded moments. Kelly listened to Amber's attempts at emotional manipulation with the clinical detachment of someone who'd dealt with difficult personalities in her medical career, occasionally offering tissues but never encouraging the drama. Amber seemed particularly frustrated that I wasn't angry or hurt anymore, since those emotions might have indicated lingering attachment she could exploit. Instead, I was simply done with our relationship in the most complete way possible, having processed the divorce emotionally and moved forward with genuine purpose and contentment. She kept asking why I couldn't forgive her mistakes and start over, apparently unable to understand that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation or continued relationship. I explained that I'd forgiven her for my own peace of mind but had no interest in rebuilding something that had been fundamentally broken by mutual incompatibility and different values. The meeting ended when Amber realized that Kelly wasn't a rebound or attempt to make her jealous, but rather evidence that I'd found someone who actually wanted to build a life with me. Kelly's genuine affection and respect for me was obvious in every interaction, creating a stark contrast to the dismissive dynamic Amber and I had shared. Amber left Seattle that same day, apparently understanding that her window for reconciliation had never actually existed because I'd been planning my exit long before the charity auction provided the final motivation. 8 months later, Amber signed divorce papers in a Portland law office, learning that my documentation of her behavior had made the proceedings swift and uncontestable, exactly as I'd planned when I began recording our conversations. Her attorney explained that the evidence I'd provided created an airtight case that left no room for disputes about asset division, alimony, or the circumstances of our separation. My lawyer revealed that the charity auction incident had been witnessed by several influential people who later provided character references supporting my claims about the marriage, including Philip's wife and 2 major donors who'd found Amber's behavior disturbing. These testimonials from respected community members carried significant weight in legal proceedings, particularly since they corroborated the pattern of public disrespect I'd documented privately. Amber had moved to a studio apartment in a less desirable part of Portland and taken a second job as a weekend receptionist at a dental office to make ends meet, a reality that seemed to shock her more than the divorce itself. She'd apparently never considered that her lifestyle had been entirely dependent on my income and business success, assuming that her marketing salary represented her actual earning potential. The dental office job paid minimum wage and required her to work weekends, eliminating the social networking opportunities she'd considered essential for career advancement. Her former colleagues at the advertising agency had moved on to better positions while she remained stuck in internal projects with no client contact, effectively ending her dreams of account management or agency leadership. She discovered through mutual acquaintances that Kelly and I had recently gotten engaged and were planning to relocate to Vancouver for my promotion to regional training coordinator with a major plumbing supply company. My career trajectory had accelerated dramatically since leaving Portland, with the Seattle certification program leading to opportunities I'd never imagined while married to someone who dismissed my professional ambitions. The regional coordinator position involved training contractors across the Pacific Northwest and developing educational programs for trade schools, work that combined my technical skills with business development in exactly the way I'd hoped. Amber seemed particularly bitter about my professional success, since she'd spent years suggesting that my work lacked advancement potential and intellectual challenge. Derek mentioned that she'd made several comments about how unfair it was that I'd found better opportunities immediately after leaving her, as if my success was somehow connected to her absence rather than my own efforts and planning. The final legal meeting revealed that I'd never sought alimony or punitive asset division, simply wanting complete separation from our shared life and the ability to move forward without financial entanglement. My lawyer had structured the divorce to be as clean and final as possible, with no ongoing obligations or connections that would require future contact between us. I'd kept my business assets, truck, and tools while leaving Amber with her personal belongings and the furniture she'd chosen for our apartment, though she'd had to sell most of it to afford her smaller living space. The legal proceedings confirmed what I'd known months earlier when I began planning my exit, that our marriage had been fundamentally incompatible and that separation was the healthiest option for both of us. Amber's signature on the divorce papers represented the final closure of a relationship that had ended emotionally long before she'd humiliated me at the charity auction. Her attorney mentioned that Amber had asked several times if there were any provisions for future reconciliation or modification of the divorce terms, apparently still hoping for some connection that might allow her back into my improved life. The lawyer explained that I'd specifically requested language that made the separation complete and permanent, with no ambiguity about our future relationship or potential for reconnection. 2 years post-divorce, Kelly and I were married and running a successful plumbing training consultancy across the Pacific Northwest, with my trade skills having transformed into a teaching and business development career that exceeded anything I'd imagined during my marriage to Amber. Our company specialized in advanced certification programs for experienced contractors, and I developed relationships with trade schools and supply companies throughout Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. Kelly had transitioned from hospital nursing to occupational health consulting, working with construction companies to develop safety protocols and injury prevention programs. We'd built something together that combined both our expertise and created genuine partnership in every aspect of our lives. The consulting business allowed us to travel frequently while maintaining our home base in Vancouver, where we'd bought a house with enough space for Kelly's home office and my workshop where I developed training materials and prototype installations. Amber encountered us at Portland International Airport, where I was traveling for a business meeting with a major construction firm that was implementing our training programs across their Pacific Northwest operations. I was waiting near our departure gate when I noticed her walking through the terminal, looking older and more worn than I remembered from our brief Seattle encounter 2 years earlier. She spotted me before I could decide whether to acknowledge her presence, and I watched her expression shift from surprise to something that looked like genuine shock at how much I'd changed. Kelly was returning from the restroom when Amber approached, and I introduced them naturally without any awkwardness or tension, discussing our upcoming business trip to evaluate training facilities in 3 different cities. Amber seemed particularly stunned by how confident and successful I'd become, since she'd apparently expected to find me in a situation similar to her own rather than thriving professionally and personally. I treated our brief airport encounter with polite professionalism, asking about her work situation and mentioning our business growth without any reference to our past relationship or the circumstances of our divorce. Kelly participated in the conversation with genuine friendliness, mentioning our recent contract expansion and upcoming relocation to a larger office space that would accommodate additional training equipment. The interaction lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it was long enough for Amber to understand that I'd used our divorce as motivation to build a completely new and better life rather than struggling with the loss of our marriage. She mentioned working at a different marketing firm with reduced responsibilities and living in the same studio apartment where she'd moved after our divorce, circumstances that contrasted sharply with the growth and success Kelly and I were discussing. When our flight was called, I shook Amber's hand politely and wished her well with genuine sincerity, having long since processed any negative emotions about our relationship into gratitude for the motivation her rejection had provided. Kelly and I walked toward our gate while Amber remained standing near the seating area, apparently processing the encounter and what it revealed about the different directions our lives had taken. During our flight, Kelly mentioned that Amber had seemed genuinely surprised by how happy and successful we were together, as if she'd expected our relationship to be temporary or somehow less substantial than what she and I had shared. I explained that Amber had never really understood my potential or ambitions, which was why our marriage had been fundamentally incompatible regardless of the specific incidents that ended it. The story concluded with my recognition that I hadn't just left Amber but had used her rejection as the catalyst to build exactly the kind of life and partnership I'd always wanted, while she remained dealing with the consequences of the independence and space she'd thought she needed. Kelly and I were planning our next business expansion into Idaho and Montana, with training contracts that would establish us as the premier plumbing education consultancy in the region, success that felt natural and sustainable because it was built on mutual respect and shared goals rather than financial dependency and social climbing.